Today, I'm going to tell you a story so dark, it makes men look over their shoulders, set deep in the old American West, where cold winds carried secrets and violence waited just beyond the firelight. This was a place where law meant little, and fate collided with blood and iron at a lonely frontier town. It all began with a single stranger stepping out of the trees. One quiet moment that was enough to shake an entire town and awaken a hunt that should have stayed buried. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. A killing frost lay heavy over Raven's Gulch when a solitary shape emerged from the timberline, his weather-beaten buckskins blending seamlessly with the rust-colored leaves. Unlike the trappers and hunters who sometimes drifted through these hard lands, this man did not angle toward the warmth of the Crossroads saloon. He stopped at the edge of the pines instead, standing perfectly still, watching the crooked frontier town below with eyes dark as deep water and just as unreadable. Before long, the people of Raven's Gulch would learn that Thorne Ridley had not come here by accident. He had followed a trail stained with death, and those who had spread blood across the frontier were nearing the day of reckoning. And before we go any further, let us know where you're watching from. If this story grips you, be sure to subscribe, because what's coming next will only grow darker. A mid-October wind sliced through Raven's Gulch, sharp as a blade, carrying the smell of wood smoke and the promise of winter. Thorne stood so motionless he might have been mistaken for part of the land itself, his scarred hands resting lightly on a long rifle, unlike any commonly seen in these territories. The weapon was custom-built and meticulously cared for, stripped of decoration except for a line of shallow notches carved into its maple stock. Silent markers of stories never spoken aloud. High above, a falcon circled, its shrill cry tearing through the unnatural quiet that clung to Thorne like a second skin. He watched as the bird descended and settled on a nearby branch. Its sharp, predatory stare mirrored his own survey of the town below. To a young woodcutter gathering kindling nearby, the sight of man and raptor together seemed almost otherworldly. The boy fled back toward town, breathless with tales of a ghostly hunter haunting the outskirts of Raven's Gulch. The settlement itself was little more than a knot of log cabins and weathered, clapboard buildings, thrown together where two trade routes crossed beneath the looming Blackbone Mountains. The saloon at the crossroads formed the town's beating heart, while Mercer Pike's general store, Elias Thorne's modest church, and Silas Brawley's sheriff office curved in a rough arc around the churned mud of the main street. Scattered between them stood the homes and shops of men and women stubborn enough to survive in this unforgiving land. Thorne Ridley would have said he chose Raven's Gulch for no reason at all if anyone had bothered to ask. Truth was, it was simply where the tracks ended, another stop in a pursuit that never truly rested. His buckskin coat bore the scars of countless seasons spent outdoors, and silver strands threaded through his dark hair caught the dying light as dusk crept in. When he finally moved, each step was careful and deliberate, placed as though the ground itself had to earn the right to bear his weight. The rifle across his back seemed to swallow the fading sunlight, its metal drinking in the last glow of day. Silas Brawley, sheriff of Raven's Gulch, was the first to notice the stranger. Standing on his porch with a pipe clenched between his teeth, he studied the man's approach. Not the loose swagger of a gunman, nor the aimless drift of a wanderer, but the efficient stillness of a predator who wasted nothing, not even movement. "Well now," Brawley muttered, tapping his pipe against the rail, "what brings your sort to a place like this?" The stranger gave no acknowledgement as he passed, his dark gaze sweeping over buildings, alleys, and the wary faces turning toward him. He moved with an unsettling awareness, as though cataloging every detail for a future purpose. Two road-worn bounty hunters lounging outside the saloon elbowed one another as Thorne drew near. Their leather vests were strung with crude trophies, a wolf's tooth, a bear claw, meant to project menace. Yet they fell silent as he passed, something in his presence urging restraint where bravado usually ruled. Inside the parsonage, June Thorne hurried her young son out of sight, though not before the boy called out with honest curiosity, "Mister, are you here to hunt the bad men?" The question lingered unanswered as June pulled Noah Thorne inside. Those watching swore they saw something flicker in Thorne's eyes, an acknowledgement cold enough to bite deeper than the autumn air. He continued on toward the general store, where Mercer Pike was arranging goods on the porch. The shopkeeper froze, sensing the stranger before he fully turned. When he did, he faced a man whose presence seemed to outweigh his physical form. "Afternoon," Pike said cautiously, the instinct to greet a customer wrestling with the unease tightening his chest. "What can I do for you?" Thorne placed a small bundle of pelts on the counter, prime hides, expertly treated. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady like distant thunder rolling in. "Supplies," he said. "Ammunition." Pike examined the pelts with a trader's trained eye. "Fine work," he admitted, running rough fingers through thick fur. "Don't see quality like this often." As he weighed them out, his gaze kept drifting to the stranger's weapons. Alongside the long rifle, Thorne carried two matched revolvers in worn holsters, maintained with the care of precision tools, not flashy ornaments meant to impress. Most telling of all was the hunting knife at his belt, its grip polished smooth by years of use, its blade honed razor sharp. This was no showpiece. It was a tool that had already drawn blood and would do so again if needed. "You passing through?" Pike asked carefully, measuring powder and lead. "Or planning to stay a while?" Thorne's eyes continued their slow assessment of the store, the street beyond, and the riders just becoming visible through the dusty window. "Depends," he replied. The sound of pounding hooves pulled both men's attention toward the street. 5 riders thundered in from the north, their horses slick with foam and heaving from being driven too hard, too fast. They rode with the careless confidence of men used to taking what they wanted. Their mismatched coats and scarred firearms marked them clearly as outlaws, not lawmen. Mercer Pike's face drained of color. "Holt Cutthroats," he muttered under his breath. "They're early." Thorne Ridley's expression remained unchanged, but something in his stance shifted. So subtle most would have missed it. Pike did not. Years on the frontier had taught him how to read men, and what he saw made him instinctively take a step back, widening the space between himself and the stranger. "Garrick Holt runs this territory," Pike said quietly. "The sheriff can't stop them. Too many. Too brutal. They come once a month to collect their tax. Folks who don't pay—" His voice trailed off as his eyes drifted toward the small graveyard on the hillside beyond town. Outside, the riders dismounted with the easy arrogance of men who feared no consequences. Their leader stepped forward, tall, broad, a bear of a man with a rust-colored beard and eyes hardened by violence, most of it his own making. The rifle across his back bore crude notches of its own, rougher than Thorne's, but no less threatening. "You should finish up and move along," Pike warned, sliding a small sack of supplies across the counter. "Holt doesn't welcome strangers." The careful wording said more than he meant to speak aloud. Thorne gathered his purchases without haste, his focus already fixed on the street where the outlaws had begun their ritual. They moved with purpose, spreading fear as they went. Across the way, at the blacksmith's shop, a protest was cut short when one of the gang struck the smith aside with a lazy backhand. "That's Keir done," Pike whispered, following Thorne's gaze. Holt's tracker. Folks say he can follow a man through a blizzard. And the big one with the shotgun, that's Orvin Holt, Garrick's brother, mean as a wounded bear. The others come and go. But those three... He stopped abruptly as Dunn glanced toward the store, his instincts sharpening as though he'd heard his name spoken aloud. The air thickened, time stretching thin in that strange stillness that often comes before blood is spilled. Dunn leaned toward Garrick Holt, murmuring something and nodding toward the general store. Holt's cold eyes shifted, locking onto the doorway where Thorne now stood, framed by shadow. For a long, silent moment, the two men studied each other across the dusty street, predator measuring predator. Then Holt smiled. It was a wide smile that never reached his eyes, and he turned toward the store. "Well now," Holt called, his voice edged with authority. "What's this? Don't believe I've had the pleasure." Thorne stepped fully onto the porch, his movements calm, unhurried. In the fading autumn light, something flashed briefly at his throat. A small silver pendant, half hidden beneath his buckskin collar. Dunn caught it instantly. His scarred face twisted for a heartbeat, recognition flickering before he masked it behind practiced indifference. He edged away from Holt without comment, a subtle retreat understood only by men familiar with violence. "Name's Ridley," Thorne said evenly. "Just passing through." Holt's grin widened, tobacco-stained teeth showing beneath his beard. "Is that so? Well, Mr. Ridley, Raven's Gulch prides itself on hospitality." He swept an arm toward the suddenly silent town. "We make sure visitors are properly welcomed." "There's a small traveler's tax," Holt continued, "for your protection while you're here." Behind him, Orvin Holt let out a dry chuckle, like bones rattling in dust. His shotgun cradled loosely, fingers resting close, but not quite, on the trigger. "Don't need protection," Thorne replied. His eyes moved calmly from man to man, noting weapons, spacing, the small tells that revealed experience. Most telling of all was Dunn, who continued to keep distance from his own gang, like a man bracing for trouble from every direction. "Everyone needs protection out here," Holt said, his friendly tone thinning to something sharper. "Wild animals, desperate men, plenty of ways to die. $5 is cheap peace of mind." The demand settled over the street like gun smoke. Everyone understood the unspoken or else. Doors closed. Curtains fell. Those who had been watching retreated, knowing how defiance usually ended. What followed happened so quickly that later retellings never quite agreed. Thorne's right hand did not reach for his revolvers. Instead, he opened one of Pike's supply sacks, withdrew a handful of bright copper pennies, and let them spill into the dirt at Holt's boots. "For your trouble," Thorne said quietly. "I won't be staying." The insult struck harder than a fist. Orvin Holt's face flushed red, his grip tightening on the shotgun. Two of the cutthroats reached for their sidearms, violence flashing across their features. Only Garrick Holt remained still, though a dangerous gleam ignited behind his eyes. "You misunderstand me, Mr. Ridley," Holt said coldly. "This isn't a negotiation." He stepped in close, using his height to press the advantage, his shadow falling across Thorne Ridley. "The tax is $5 in silver," Garrick Holt said evenly. "Or we take payment another way." His eyes drifted, deliberate and unmistakable, toward the custom rifle riding Thorne's back. "That rifle isn't for sale," Thorne replied. His voice was quiet, controlled, yet it carried farther than Holt's threat. "Neither is my time. You've had both. Move on." Nearby, Keir Dunn, who had been studying Thorne with mounting intensity, stiffened abruptly. "Boss," he said, tension threading his words with something close to fear. "I think whatever warning Dunn was about to deliver died as Silas Brawley approached, his steps careful, measured, like a man crossing thin ice." The sheriff's badge caught the fading light, dull and unimpressive among the gathered outlaws. "Now, gentlemen," Brawley said, keeping his hands well clear of his revolver, "let's keep this civil. Mr. Holt, I'm sure our visitor meant no offense. Probably just a misunderstanding about how things work around here." The attempt at peace had the opposite effect. Holt's expression hardened instantly. "Stay out of this, Brawley," he snapped. "This is between me and the newcomer." Thorne hadn't moved. His stillness was more unsettling than any drawn weapon. His eyes, dark as deep water, never left Holt, the gaze of a hunter who had already chosen his target and was simply waiting for the right moment. Then the saloon door creaked open. Lorna Whitlock stepped into the street, the owner's daughter, known across the territory for her beauty and a spine made of iron. She took in the scene with a single glance, and instead of retreating, she crossed the street, boots striking the dirt with purpose. "Back already, Garrick?" she called, her voice sharp enough to cut steel. "You running low on courage if you're collecting before month's end?" Holt's attention shifted, his expression softening just a fraction at the sight of her. Everyone in Raven's Gulch knew of his unwanted interest in Lorna, an interest she had rejected more fiercely each time. "Lorna," he said, attempting courtesy and failing. "Business brought us in early. Don't worry, I'll still find time to pay you a proper visit." "I'd sooner entertain a rattlesnake," she shot back, stepping onto the general store porch beside Thorne. Whether she meant to stand with him or simply chose the strongest ground was anyone's guess. Holt's jaw tightened. His hand settled on his holstered revolver, not drawing it, just reminding everyone it was there. "You've got a sharp tongue," he warned. "One day it'll cut deeper than you expect." The threat, thinly wrapped in concern, pushed Brawley forward despite his obvious reluctance. "That's enough, Garrick," the sheriff said, his voice firmer now. "You've already taken from most folks this month. Whatever brought you back early, it wasn't to harass Miss Whitlock or shake down travelers." Silence followed, thick and ugly. Holt's men spread in a loose arc, hands hovering near their weapons, waiting. Only Dunn stood apart, his scarred face tight with unease as he kept staring at Thorne like a man chasing a memory he didn't want to find. Finally, Holt smiled again, false and practiced. "Tell you what, Sheriff," he said lightly. "Since you care so much about hospitality, why don't you cover Mr. Ridley's contribution? $5 from your own pocket, and we all part as friends." The trap was obvious. Pay and admit Holt's rule. Refuse and invite bloodshed. Before Brawley could answer, Thorne spoke. His voice was soft, but it silenced the street. "The lady asked you to leave," he said calmly. The sheriff suggested the same. "Sounds like consensus." Holt's smile vanished. Cold calculation replaced it. "You're either brave or stupid, Ridley," he said. "Out here, far from civilization, men like me make the rules." "Men like you," Thorne replied evenly, "confuse cruelty with strength and fear with respect." He shifted his stance slightly, just enough. Dunn took another step back and raised a warning hand. "Boss," he said urgently, "we should go now." Holt stared at him. "You losing your nerve, Keir?" Dunn shook his head, pale beneath the scar. "Not my nerve. Just remembering some stories from up north. About a hunter who, I don't give a damn about campfire stories." Holt snapped. "No one tells me when to leave." He turned back to Thorne, his hand now resting fully on his revolver. "You've got one last chance," Holt said. "Pay the tax, or things turn ugly." All across Raven's Gulch, people watched from behind shutters and curtains, certain they were about to witness a death. Either the end of a fool who challenged Holt's authority, or the first spark of hope this town had seen in a long time. As the autumn sun sank behind the Blackbone Mountains, stretching long shadows across the dirt street, Thorne Ridley stood unmoving, and the line between resolution and bloodshed grew razor thin. He stood motionless on the general store's porch, a lone figure squared against the most feared outlaws in the territory. Whatever followed would mark Raven's Gulch forever, sending consequences far beyond this forgotten frontier town. "I know who you are." The words cut through the tension like a blade. Keir Dunn stepped back from the others, his voice sharp and unsteady as he pointed at Thorne Ridley. "That pendant, those eyes. It's you, the ghost hunter of Black Ridge Pass." A visible shudder ran through the Holt Cutthroats. Orvin Holt lowered his shotgun an inch, doubt creeping into his hardened stare. Even Garrick Holt hesitated, his fingers pausing on the grip of his revolver as he studied Thorne with new caution. 3 winters ago," Dunn continued, retreating farther from his own men. "A whole band vanished near the Montana line. 15 outlaws swallowed by a blizzard. Only one lived long enough to tell it. Said a hunter moved through the storm like a wraith, taking them one by one." Beside Thorne, Lorna Whitlock searched his face for denial and found none. Across the street, Silas Brawley stared harder, recognition slowly settling into his weathered features. "That's just a campfire story," Garrick scoffed, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Tales meant to scare green boys." "The Dennison brothers," Dunn pressed on, ignoring him. "The Calhoun gang, the butcher of Sweetwater, all gone after crossing a trapper with a custom rifle and a silver pendant." His face drained of color. "They say he never misses. Not once." Thorne did not move. His dark eyes gave nothing away. When he finally spoke, his calm voice carried down the street with unsettling clarity. "You seem to know a lot of stories, Dunn." The tracker flinched as his name fell from Thorne's lips. "Were you there when the Keller homestead burned last spring?" Thorne asked quietly. "When the mother and her daughters died?" The question hung unfinished, but its weight crushed the air. "That wasn't us," Dunn blurted, panic slipping through his voice. "We never rode that far north. We weren't anywhere near Bear Creek." A faint smile touched Thorne's mouth, cold, humorless. "I never mentioned Bear Creek." The truth landed like a noose. Dunn realized his mistake too late, his hand jerking toward his gun. "That's enough," Garrick snapped, signaling his men to hold. "I don't care who you think he is. No one threatens my outfit." He fixed Thorne with a hard stare. "Ghost hunter or not, you're outnumbered." Lorna stepped forward without hesitation, placing herself squarely between Thorne and the outlaws. "If you want blood in the middle of town, Garrick, you'll have to go through me first." "Lorna, don't," Brawley started. She silenced him with a glare. "We've lived under their boot long enough. Sheriff, if this man is who Dunn says he is, then maybe it's time we found our spine." Garrick's expression darkened. "I've been patient with you out of respect for your father," he warned. "But patience runs out." "So does mine," Thorne said quietly. With a gentle hand, he moved Lorna aside and stepped forward again. "You have a choice, Holt. Ride out now. Don't come back. And if I don't..." Garrick sneered, though his certainty was slipping. Thorne's reply was flat and final. Then I'll hunt you, every last one of you." Silence swallowed Raven's Gulch, broken only by the distant cry of Koa circling high above. Then another sound intruded, the thunder of hooves from the south. Heads turned as a dust cloud rose on the horizon, resolving into riders driving hard toward town. Long dusters flapped. Badges caught the light. Territorial riders, Garrick cursed under his breath. "Did you know about this?" he snapped at Dunn. Dunn shook his head, confusion etched deep. "No one said anything about marshals." Brawley stared as well. "I didn't send for them." "I did." The voice came from behind. Mercer Pike stepped onto the porch, his back straight, resolve stiffening his old frame. "After what happened to the Miller family last month, I sent word to Fort Collins. Didn't expect them so soon." Garrick spun on him, fury twisting his face. "You treacherous old—" The sharp metallic click of a rifle being cocked cut him off. Thorne hadn't raised the weapon. It remained on his back, but his hand rested on the stock, ready. "You won't touch him," Thorne said calmly. "The riders are coming. Your decision just got simpler." He held Garrick's gaze. "Ride north. Don't stop until you cross the territorial line." Garrick's hand hovered over his revolver, torn between rage and survival. The riders were still minutes out. Enough time for blood. "Boss," Dunn urged in a low, urgent voice. "We should leave. Live to fight another day." "Coward!" Garrick spat. But the word rang hollow. The outlaw chief was no simple brute. He had stayed alive on the frontier by knowing exactly when to press an advantage and when to step away. Something steady and unblinking in Thorne Ridley's stare told him this was not a fight he could control. With a curse sharp enough to scorch the air, Garrick Holt edged backward toward his horse. "This isn't finished, Ghost Hunter," he spat. "Not by a damn sight." "It could be," Thorne answered calmly. "Right now, your decision." For a heartbeat, it looked as though Holt might choose blood. His face twisted with murderous intent, fingers twitching near his revolver. But Keir Dunn was already swinging into the saddle, and the distant dust cloud of the territorial riders was growing larger with every second. "Move!" Holt snarled at his men. "We're pulling out. For now." The Holt Cutthroats mounted in haste, their earlier swagger gone, replaced by urgency. Before turning north, Holt fixed Thorne with a final, venomous stare. "I won't forget you," he promised. "We'll meet again." Thorne's reply was barely more than a breath, yet it carried across the space between them. "I'm counting on it." With a violent jerk of the reins, Holt wheeled his horse and drove his men north, hooves pounding and dust boiling behind them. They disappeared around the bend just as the first riders thundered in from the south. The arrival of the territorial riders shifted the very air of Raven's Gulch. As the dust settled, townsfolk crept from doorways and shuttered windows, drawn by the sight of Holt's retreat and the rare presence of federal lawmen. Eamon Rourke, broad-shouldered and iron-haired, dismounted with a grunt and swept the street with a seasoned eye. His gaze settled on Silas Brawley at once. "Sheriff," Rourke said curtly, "looks like we missed something." "Marshal Rourke," Brawley replied, his tone just as reserved. "Wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," Rourke said dryly. His attention shifted to Thorne, now standing near the edge of the general store porch, once again more observer than centerpiece. Before Brawley could answer, Mercer Pike stepped forward. "It was close, Marshal," the shopkeeper said. "They've been draining this town for months. Would have been worse today if not for Mr. Ridley." Rourke's brows lifted slightly as he studied Thorne. "Ridley, huh?" Same man who tracked the Dennison brothers through Bitter Creek? Thorne offered neither confirmation nor denial, his dark eyes meeting the marshal's without flinching. Lorna Whitlock stepped up beside him. "He stood against Holt when no one else would," she said, her glance toward Brawley leaving little unsaid. "Made them ride out without a shot fired." Rourke nodded. "That fits your reputation," he said to Thorne. "Efficient, quiet, bloodless, when possible." He stroked his graying beard. "Though not always, if the stories are right." "Stories grow," Thorne replied evenly. "Why are you here, Marshal?" he added. "Raven's Gulch is a long way from Fort Collins." Rourke's expression hardened. "We're hunting something worse than Holt. A killer moving across the territories. Homesteads butchered from Dakota country clear down to here." He drew a poster from his saddlebag and held it up. "Name's Malach Vire. Some call him the Surgeon, for what he does before his victims die." A shiver rippled through the gathered townsfolk. Even Brawley looked unsettled. "Vire was seen near Bear Creek 2 weeks ago," Rourke continued, his eyes never leaving Thorne. "Same place where the Keller homestead burned." "A coincidence?" Rourke asked quietly. Thorne's face revealed nothing, but Lorna noticed his grip tighten on the rifle strap. "There are no coincidences out here," Thorne said after a moment. "Only tracks most folks don't notice." A thin smile crossed Rourke's face. "Exactly my thinking." He turned to the crowd. "We'll be staying the night. Anyone with information on Vire or Holt should speak to us." As the riders moved off to tend their horses and find provisions, townsfolk gathered around Thorne. Fear gave way to something unfamiliar. Hope. Mercer Pike clasped Thorne's shoulder, his grip stronger than expected. "Don't know if you're the man Dunn claimed," he said quietly, "but what you did today gave this town something we've been missing." "What's that?" Thorne asked. Lorna answered before Pike could. Her green eyes were bright, steady. "A chance." Gradually, the crowd thinned as frontier life reasserted itself. Eamon Rourke led his men toward the Crossroads saloon. Silas Brawley retreated to his office, worry etched deep into his face. And Thorne Ridley remained where he was, silent, watchful, knowing the real hunt had only just begun. Lorna Whitlock remained beside Thorne Ridley as twilight settled over Raven's Gulch, the day's heat bleeding away into the cool blue of evening. "You should come to the saloon," she said at last. "My father will want to thank you. Properly." Thorne shook his head once. "Best if I keep some distance. Garrick Holt will come back sooner or later. Anyone seen standing with me becomes a target." "We've been targets for months," Lorna replied, that same fire flashing in her eyes, the same resolve that had put her between him and armed men earlier. "At least now we're pushing back." Before Thorne could answer, a shape detached itself from the shadows between the buildings. Keir Dunn moved carefully, like a man who expected a bullet at any second. His hands were empty and raised, making no effort to hide that he carried no weapon. Lorna stiffened instinctively, but Thorne only watched Dunn approach with the same steady appraisal he had shown all day. "You didn't ride out with Holt?" Thorne said quietly. Dunn shook his head, the scar on his face stark in the fading light. "Slipped away while they were arguing about which trail to take." His eyes flicked toward the saloon, where the territorial riders had gathered. "I need to talk to you. Alone. Anything you say to him, you can say in front of me," Lorna said, stepping closer to Thorne in silent defiance. Dunn hesitated, clearly uneasy. "It's about Malach Vire," he said finally, "and why Holt really came back to town early." Thorne studied him for a long moment, reading the tension in his posture, the fear he wasn't hiding well. Then he nodded slightly. Very well. He turned to Lorna. Tell your father I'll join him later. This won't take long. She looked ready to argue, but something in Thorne's expression stopped her. Don't trust him, she warned instead, casting Dunn a final, suspicious glance before moving toward the saloon. Once she was out of earshot, Dunn spoke fast, his voice barely above a whisper. Vire isn't just drifting through these territories. He's hunting you, Ridley. Thorne's face didn't change. Holt made a deal with him. Dunn continued, taking Thorne's silence as permission. We draw you out. Vire pays us in gold. That's why we came back early. Why we caused trouble. It was all bait. Why would Vire want me? Thorne asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Dunn glanced around nervously. Black Ridge Pass. He was there. The only one who survived the gang you ran through in that blizzard. His voice dropped further. He spent years studying you. Your methods. Says you're the only hunter worth facing. In the deepening dusk, Dunn's scarred face looked almost hollow. He's not just killing Ridley. He's practicing. Every family he slaughters is training, trying to hunt the way you do. The truth settled between them like a weight. Thorne absorbed it in silence, measuring it against his own instincts. Why tell me this? He asked at last. Crossing Holt and Vire puts you in the ground. Dunn let out a brittle laugh. I've ridden with killers all my life, thieves, brutes. His voice faltered. But what Vire did to that family near Bear Creek, no one deserves that. Not even you. Your concern is noted, Thorne said dryly. It's not concern, Dunn snapped. It's survival. Once Holt served his purpose, Vire will kill him and the rest of us. Me included. My only chance is if you stop him first. Thorne stood motionless, the stillness of a predator deciding when to strike. Where is he? He asked. An old mining settlement north of here, Dunn replied. Blackwater, silver ran out years ago. He swallowed. He's waiting to hear you took the bait. And Holt? Headed that way. They think they're regrouping. They don't know Vire is already there. Dunn's hand drifted unconsciously to the scar on his face. I should get back before they notice I'm gone. Holt's already suspicious. Thorne nodded once. Go. Tell them I'm staying at the saloon, drinking, letting my guard down. Dunn hesitated. You believe me then? I believe you're afraid, Thorne said evenly. Whether it's of Vire or me doesn't matter. Dunn accepted that with a tight nod. One more thing. Vire has hostages, a family taken from a nearby homestead. He paused. They were alive when I left. That finally stirred Thorne, just barely. A tightening around the eyes, a subtle shift in his stance. Go, Thorne said again, urgency now edged into his voice. Dunn vanished back into the shadows. Thorne remained where he stood, his face once more a mask. Only someone watching closely would have noticed his fingers brush the silver pendant at his throat, not in doubt, but in resolve. In the last light of day, Thorne Ridley lifted his gaze to the darkening sky where Koa still circled, a black shape against the first stars. Man and bird shared a silent understanding, hunter recognizing hunter. The chase had begun. Far to the north, the abandoned mining town of Blackwater lay half-buried in shadow, clouds drifting across the moon. Once alive with hope, it now stood rotting. Collapsed buildings, a rusted stamp mill, and the bones of ambition scattered in the dirt. The mine gaped open like a black mouth, the hollow that had once given Blackwater its promise, and then sealed its fate. Thorne Ridley approached on foot, having left his horse tied nearly a mile back. He moved through the tall grass like a wraith, moccasined steps soundless on the packed earth. His custom rifle rested in his arms, ready but steady, as he studied the dead town from behind a pine split long ago by lightning. 2 campfires burned in what had once been the main street. One was large and loud, surrounded by the Holt Cutthroats. The other was smaller, set apart, where a single figure sat motionless, watching the outlaws from a distance. Even from here, Thorne felt the man's stillness, an unnatural calm that echoed his own. Malach Vire. Thorne hadn't come blind. After Keir Dunn's warning, he had stopped briefly at the saloon, where Eamon Rourke was holding court with the territorial riders. The exchange had been short and clipped. "You're certain Vire has hostages?" Rourke had asked, his lined face hard in the lamplight. "Dunn has no reason to lie," Thorne replied. "Not when he's already betraying both Vire and Garrick Holt." Rourke had nodded after a long pause. "We'll follow at first light. You take the night." Then, more quietly, "I've heard stories about how you hunt, Ridley. Didn't believe half of them until today." Thorne hadn't answered. He had simply accepted the extra ammunition and vanished into the dark. Now, as he surveyed the ruins, he counted 14 men at Holt's fire, the full gang present. Dunn sat apart from them, his scarred face catching stray firelight. They were drinking, passing bottles, their voices drifting across the open ground in fragments of bravado and irritation. Vire's camp was different. He had chosen ground near the old assayer's office, a position with clear sight lines in every direction. The hostages weren't visible, but a small shed behind him bore a fresh padlock, new metal glaring amid decades of rot. Thorne noticed disturbances in the dust near Vire's position. Trip lines, carefully placed, not crude, not rushed. Vire had studied him. This would not be a simple hunt. With deliberate patience, Thorne began a slow circle of the town, mapping approaches, cover, and kill zones. The quarter moon gave just enough light to work by, leaving shadows thick enough to disappear into. As he completed the circuit, an owl's call drifted from the mine entrance. Too perfect. Human. Thorne froze. The call came again, followed by the faintest movement at the mine's edge. Someone was trying to draw him in. After weighing the risk, he moved toward the sound. If it was a trap, it was intricate enough to deserve attention. If not, it might change everything. It took nearly 20 minutes to reach the mine. Each step was calculated, careful not to disturb the night's rhythm. At the sagging timbers framing the entrance, Thorne pressed against the wood, listening before daring to look inside. "Mr. Ridley?" a small voice whispered. "Is that you?" Thorne said nothing. "Please," the voice trembled. "He said you'd come. The scarred man. He helped me escape. Told me to hide here and signal if I saw someone with a silver pendant." Thorne shifted just enough to see inside. A boy of about 12 stood in the shadows. His clothes were torn and filthy, his face streaked with dirt and dried tears. One arm hung stiffly at his side. "The others are still locked up," the boy whispered. "Ma and Pa. My sister, the man with the knife, the one they call the surgeon. He said he's saving them for when you arrive." "How many?" Thorne asked softly, still not fully revealing himself. "5, the boy answered. "Us 4, and Harlan Fitch from the next homestead. The scarred man let me go when the red-bearded one started arguing with the surgeon." Dunn had risked everything. If Holt or Vire discovered that betrayal, Dunn would be dead in seconds. "Where are they keeping the rest?" Thorne asked. He stepped into the mouth of the mine. Moonlight caught the silver pendant at his throat. The boy's eyes widened. "The shed behind where the knife man sits," he said. "There's a root cellar under it. That's where he put them." His voice broke. "He hurt Mr. Fitch bad. Made us watch." Thorne's face remained unreadable, but something hardened behind his dark eyes. "What's your name, son?" "Eli Rowan." "Eli," Thorne said calmly, pulling a small oilcloth-wrapped bundle from his pack. "You stay here. Food, water. No matter what you hear, don't move." The boy nodded. "The marshals will arrive by dawn," Thorne continued. Then, after a pause, "If I don't come back, you tell them everything." Eli swallowed and nodded again. "Are you going to kill them all, sir?" he asked quietly. Thorne didn't answer that. Instead, he asked, "Can you shoot, Eli?" "Yes, sir." Thorne nodded once. The hunt fully joined. Thorne handed the boy an old army revolver, then nodded once and drew a small derringer from the inside pocket of his buckskin coat. "2 rounds," he said quietly. "Use them only if someone finds you before the territorial riders arrive." He showed the boy how to cock the hammer and squeeze the trigger, slow and deliberate, then placed the weapon into his trembling hands. "Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," the boy replied, gripping the derringer with solemn care. Satisfied, Thorne eased back toward the mine entrance, pausing to study the ghost town once more. The plan was clear now, each movement forming in his mind with the same precision as the rifle resting against his shoulder. "Mr. Ridley," the boy whispered. Thorne turned. "The surgeon told me to tell you something if I ever saw you," the boy said, confusion and fear etched across his face. He said, "Tell the ghost hunter that Black Ridge was only the beginning." Something crossed Thorne's face then. Brief, unguarded, recognition, confirmation. It vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only the stillness behind. "Thank you, Eli," Thorne said softly. "Stay hidden." Then he was gone, dissolving into the darkness, leaving the boy alone in the mine with the weight of the weapon and the truth he carried. At the main camp, tension gnawed at the Holt Cutthroats. Garrick Holt paced around the fire, stopping now and then to glare toward the smaller blaze where Malach Vire sat apart, silent and watchful. "This is nonsense," Garrick growled, taking another pull from his bottle. "We're sitting out here like bait while that butcher stares at us." Keir Dunn, still keeping his distance, spoke carefully. "Vire said Ridley would come. Said he can't help himself, can't stop hunting men like us. And you believe that lunatic?" Orvin Holt rumbled, methodically wiping down his shotgun. "He's madder than a snake-bit coyote." "Crazy or not," Garrick replied, "he's paying us well. 20 gold apiece if we help him catch the ghost hunter." "If," Dunn pressed. "And that's a big if. What if Ridley brings the marshals with him? What if this is a trap for us?" Garrick's hand snapped to his revolver. "You getting cold feet, Keir? Sounds to me like you're looking for an excuse to run." "Just being cautious," Dunn said quickly, raising his hands. "That's why you keep me around." Before Garrick could answer, a low whistle sliced through the night. 3 sharp notes, unmistakably deliberate. Every head turned toward Vire's camp. The killer had risen to his feet. "He wants a word," Garrick muttered, checking his revolver as he started toward the smaller fire. "Orvin, keep an eye on our tracker. He's jumpy tonight." As Garrick crossed the open ground between the camps, no one noticed the shadow peeling away from the ruined water tower, moving soundlessly toward the shed where the hostages were held. Thorne reached the shed from the rear, using the assayer's office for cover. The padlock was solid, too loud to break cleanly. Instead, he knelt and studied the hinges. They were old, rusted. With his hunting knife, he worked the corroded pins free inch by careful inch, opening the door just enough to look inside. The shed was empty, except for a trap door in the floor, the root cellar. He listened. Beneath the boards came faint breathing and quiet sobbing. Back at Vire's fire, Garrick's patience finally snapped. "One of the brats is missing," Vire said calmly. Garrick stiffened. "What do you mean, missing?" "I mean," Vire replied, adjusting his spectacles with irritating care, "that when I checked the cellar an hour ago, there were 4 hostages instead of 5. The boy is gone." His pale eyes swept the camp. Someone helped him. "You saying one of my men?" "I'm saying," Vire cut in, "that the ghost hunter is already here, watching us, measuring us." A thin smile crept across his lips. "Just as I expected." At the shed, Thorne eased the trapdoor open enough to see below. 4 figures huddled in the darkness. Grant Rowan, May Rowan, their daughter Clara, and a badly injured Harlan Fitch. They flinched at the sudden blade of moonlight. "Help is coming," Thorne whispered. "Stay quiet. Be ready to move when I return." May Rowan started to speak, but Grant silenced her, nodding gratefully. Thorne closed the trapdoor and slipped back into the shadows. He had taken 3 steps when a voice like dry leaves rasped beside him. "I've been waiting for you, ghost hunter." Malach Vire stepped into the moonlight, a curved blade gleaming in his hand, shaped like a surgeon's scalpel, only larger, sharper, crueler. "Black Ridge Pass," Vire said conversationally. 15 men went into that storm. Only I walked out. Do you know why? Thorne didn't move, rifle ready, but lowered. "Because you hid while they died," he answered evenly. Vire smiled, though no warmth touched his pale blue eyes. "No, because I understood what you were teaching us." He spread his free hand. "Patience, precision, the art of the hunt." And in the dead town of Blackwater, 2 predators finally faced one another in the dark. He had spent years dissecting your techniques, refining them, reshaping them, by slaughtering innocent families. Thorne Ridley's voice stayed calm, but something lethal slid beneath the surface. "Practice," Malach Vire said lightly, as though describing a craft. "Learning how to read sign, how people move, how they hide. Every household taught me something new." He tilted his head, curious. "Did you really believe I chose those homesteads at random?" Understanding struck Thorne like a blow. "The Callers, the Millers, the Rowans," he said. "They helped me." Vire's smile widened. "Exactly. Anyone who aided the ghost hunter became my classroom. Elegant symmetry, don't you think? You learned to hunt by killing my companions, so I learned by killing yours." "And now?" Thorne asked, already knowing. "Now we close the circle," Vire replied, reverence creeping into his tone. "Hunter against hunter, the final proof of everything I've mastered." He gestured toward the Holt camp, where Garrick Holt was returning, visibly agitated. "Those fools believe they're helping me capture you. They don't understand. They're only scenery for our finale." "There will be no finale," Thorne said flatly. "Only justice for the families you butchered." Vire laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "So righteous, as if your hands are clean." He spun the curved blade with effortless skill. "How many men have you buried, ghost hunter? How many graves without names?" "The difference," Thorne replied, "is they earned it." "And who made you judge?" Vire countered smoothly. At Black Ridge Pass, we both learned the same truth, that hunting men is the only pursuit worthy of us. A shout tore through the night. At the Holt camp, Orvin Holt had discovered Keir Dunn's absence. Weapons came up. Men scrambled, shouting warnings. Vire's expression soured. "Amateurs," he muttered. Then louder toward the camp, "Check the mine. The boy's hiding there." Thorne's eyes narrowed, just enough to betray his concern for Eli Rowan. Vire noticed immediately. "You've already found him," the killer said, amused. "Predictable. I expected more imagination from the legend." "You'll get it," Thorne said softly, his finger easing onto the trigger. But Vire was already melting back into shadow. "Not yet. The game has just begun. Let's see how you answer my opening move." He vanished behind the assayer's office. A heavy thud followed, then muffled struggle, from the direction of the shed. Vire had gone for the hostages. Thorne turned instantly. At the same moment, gunfire erupted from the Holt camp. The outlaws had spotted movement near the mine and were firing blindly into the dark. Eli was in danger. The prisoners were in danger. And Vire was springing his trap. Thorne acted. He raised his rifle and fired 3 quick shots, not at men, but at the rotted supports of the old water tower looming above the Holt camp. Decades-weakened beams shattered. With a thunderous roar, the tower collapsed, dumping water and splintered timber onto the outlaws below. Chaos exploded. Men scattered, shouting, blinded, disoriented. Using the opening, Thorne sprinted for the shed. The trapdoor inside lay open. Sounds of struggle echoed from below. He dropped into the root cellar, landing in a crouch, rifle sweeping the darkness. Vire stood there, holding Clara Rowan tight against him, his blade pressed to her throat. Grant Rowan bled from a fresh wound. May Rowan and Harlan Fitch were pinned against the far wall, frozen with terror. "Predictable," Vire sighed. The great ghost hunter undone by conscience. "Let her go," Thorne said. His voice was low. "Absolute." Vire pretended to consider it. "No, not yet." He pressed the blade harder, drawing a thin line of blood. "Set the rifle down, or I begin my work." Time stretched. Slowly, deliberately, Thorne lowered the rifle to the dirt floor. "Kick it away," Vire ordered. Thorne complied. The weapon skidded into the shadows. Vire nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now we can proceed." "Proceed with what?" Thorne asked, empty-handed but coiled like a spring. "Your education," Vire replied. "You kill too cleanly, too fast. There's no appreciation for the craft." His free hand stroked Clara's hair in a grotesque parody of tenderness. "I'm going to show you how much you still have to learn." Above them, the confusion outside sharpened into coordinated shouts. The Holt Cutthroats were regrouping. Vire smiled. "Your little distraction bought you maybe 5 minutes. Soon Holt's men will find us, angry, betrayed." His eyes gleamed. "I'll offer them a bargain. They can have you. I keep my subjects." "They won't trust you," Thorne said. "They don't need to," Vire replied calmly. "They only need to hate you more." Footsteps drew closer. Voices called Dunn's name, promising brutal punishment for his betrayal. In the tight silence of the cellar, Thorne's hand slid slowly toward his belt. The hunt had entered its final phase. He noticed at once. "Easy now," Malach Vire murmured, tightening the blade against the girl's throat. "Hands where I can see them, ghost hunter." Thorne Ridley went still, then slowly lifted his hands to shoulder height. "You mentioned Black Ridge Pass," Thorne said, as if changing course. "Said it was only the beginning." Vire's eyes shone. "You remember? Good. Black Ridge was my awakening. watching you dismantle our crew, turning the blizzard itself into a weapon. It was magnificent. His voice softened with awe. That's when I understood what I was meant to become. What you became, Thorne replied evenly, is a butcher, nothing more. Vire's composure cracked. Rage twisted his features. Nothing more? I elevated killin' into art. Every victim a canvas, every cut a brushstroke. Spittle flew as the scholar's mask fell away. You had the vision, you just lacked the nerve to embrace it. As Vire ranted, Thorne caught movement above. The trap door shifted, a shadow crossing the opening too small to be one of the Holt men. Eli Rowan. The boy was risking everything. Thorne needed time. You're right about one thing, he said, drawing Vire's focus back. Black Ridge was only the beginning. Yes, Vire agreed eagerly, settling. You do understand. I understand you missed the most important lesson. Thorne continued, stepping half a pace closer. Never let your prey set the terms of the hunt. Vire's eyes narrowed. Stay back. Above them, Eli peered down, the tiny derringer shaking in his hands. He had a clean angle on Vire's back, but with an unfamiliar weapon and a hostage in the way, the risk was enormous. Thorne saw the boy's hesitation and chose, in a motion nearly too fast to follow. Thorne reached for the silver pendant at his throat. Vire flinched instinctively, jerking back just enough to loosen his grip. Thorne shouted, Now! 2 shots cracked almost together, one from above as Eli fired, and another from Thorne's pendant, twisted open to reveal a concealed derringer. Eli's bullet went wide, splintering a beam near Vire's head. Thorne's did not. The round slammed into Vire's shoulder, spinning him away. The girl tore free and ran to her family. Vire staggered but stayed upright, blood blooming across his shirt as he lunged with the curved blade. Thorne sidestepped, using Vire's momentum to hurl him into the packed earth wall. Vire recovered fast, slashing with trained precision. The knife opened Thorne's forearm as he blocked. First blood. Yes, Vire hissed, thrilled. Fight me. Show me the ghost hunter without his precious rifle. Outside, boots thundered. The Holt Cutthroats were closing in. Time was gone. Thorne glanced at the terrified family, then at Eli above. Eli, he called, backing from Vire's next rush. Get them out, now! The boy vanished. Seconds later, a rope ladder dropped into the cellar. Vire lunged again. Thorne caught his wrist. They locked together, straining for control of the blade. Go! Thorne barked to the prisoners. Marshals at dawn. Head for the mine. Harlan Fitch, injured, needed Grant Rowan's help to reach the ladder. May Rowan shoved Clara Rowan ahead of her, forcing her to climb first. As they scrambled upward, Thorne and Vire grappled in the cramped dark, muscle against muscle. They won't save you, Vire snarled, shockingly strong. The blade crept closer to Thorne's throat as blood slicked his grip. No one can. Above, boots hammered on the shed floor. The Holt men had arrived. You were right about one thing, Thorne grunted, twisting against the pressure. Black Ridge was only the beginning. He shifted his weight and redirected Vire's drive, rolling the killer's arm inward. The blade arced up beneath Vire's chin. Vire's eyes widened in stunned disbelief as his own knife slid home, ending the terror he'd spread across the frontier. His body collapsed at Thorne's feet. Thorne snatched his rifle from the corner and looked up. The last hostages were clear. But the outlaws were directly overhead, seconds away. He checked the rifle, steadied his breathing. The night wasn't finished. Wood scraped, men converged. Trapped in the cellar with Vire's body cooling beside him, Thorne weighed his options. The trap door was the only exit, and the danger. 5 men at least, armed, furious. Too tight for his usual work. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small leather pouch, a pinch of dark powder scattered onto the lantern's flame. The light sputtered, then flared, belching thick, acrid smoke that flooded the cellar in seconds. "What the hell?" a voice shouted from above as smoke poured up through the trap door. Thorne Ridley slung his rifle across his back and coiled low, every muscle drawn tight. When the first curious face leaned down into the rolling haze, Thorne exploded upward. His hands locked onto the rim of the opening. The startled outlaw stumbled, and in the same motion, Thorne vaulted through the trap door, landing squarely among his enemies. The tight walls of the shed turned the odds in his favor. 5 men crowded the space, too close to fire without risking each other. Thorne surged forward, smashing his shoulder into the nearest man while his hand cleared one of his Colts. The first shot shattered a leg, dropping its owner with a howl. The second round punched into another man's shoulder as Thorne spun, yanking the wounded outlaw in front of him as a living shield. A bullet screamed past his ear and buried itself in the wall. "It's him," someone yelled, panic cracking his voice. "The ghost hunter!" From outside, Garrick Holt's roar cut through the chaos. "Don't let him get out." Thorne drove an elbow into his human shield's temple, dropping the man cold, then dove through the shed doorway. Gunfire chased him as he rolled across broken ground and came up behind a water trough, just as rounds shredded wood inches from his head. The night erupted into madness. Holt Cutthroats scattered through the ghost town, some firing blindly toward the shed, others racing to form a tightening ring. In the confusion, no one noticed Malach Vire's absence, or the hostages slipping toward the abandoned mine. Thorne drew his second Colt and steadied his breathing, sinking into the rhythm he knew by heart. This time, he wasn't the hunter. He was the prey. The disadvantage should have worried him. Instead, the faintest smile touched his mouth. Being underestimated had always been a weapon. "Ridley!" Garrick Holt bellowed across the ruins. "There's nowhere to run. You're surrounded." Thorne didn't answer. He studied silhouettes flickering in firelight. 14 men earlier, minus the 2 he'd dropped. 12 remained, spread in a rough arc that crept tighter by the second. Among them loomed Orvin Holt, shotgun cradled with deadly patience, directing men with clipped hand signals. Orvin wasn't reckless like his brother. He was careful. He was the real danger. Then Thorne saw movement at the edge of the firelight. Keir Dunn, hugging the shadows, wasn't moving toward Thorne at all. He was angling for the mine. For Eli Rowan. The realization snapped Thorne's focus into place. The gang no longer mattered. The innocents did. He holstered one Colt and slid his hunting knife free, the blade flashing once in the moonlight as he tested its balance. 30 yards lay between him and Dunn. Open ground, almost no cover, at least 5 guns watching. A straight run would get him killed. Instead, Thorne eased backward behind the water trough until he reached the corner of the assayer's office. "He's moving south," someone shouted. Gunfire hammered the clapboards. Thorne dropped flat and wriggled beneath the raised foundation. Years of rot had opened gaps wide enough to see through, letting him map the outlaws' positions while staying invisible. Dunn reached the mine entrance, revolver already drawn. He paused only a heartbeat before slipping into the darkness where Eli and the hostages hid. Time was gone. Thorne's eyes found the abandoned stamp mill across the street, a hulking relic of rust and splintered beams. Its massive water wheel loomed directly above 3 Holt Cutthroats, crouched behind a collapsed wagon. He raised his Colt. 2 shots cracked the night. For a breath, nothing happened. Then metal screamed. The ancient supports gave way, and the water wheel tore loose, crashing down onto the wagon and the men behind it. Shouts of pain and alarm erupted as the gang rushed to their trapped comrades. Thorne broke cover and ran. He flowed from shadow to shadow, reaching the mine just as a gunshot echoed from within, followed by a child's scream. Eli. Thorne plunged into the blackness without slowing. The tunnel ran straight for 20 yards before splitting. At the junction, a lantern burned low, casting a harsh glow over the scene. Keir Dunn stood with his back to Thorne, revolver leveled at Eli, who had stepped in front of his family. The boy's sleeve was torn and bloody, just a graze, but close. "Don't make me do this," Dunn said, voice raw, almost pleading. "Just move, kid. It's not you I want." "You helped me," Eli said, shaking but steady. "Why are you doing this now?" Dunn's scarred face twisted, fear and calculation warring behind his eyes. "Because Garrick Holt will kill me when he learns I betrayed him," he snapped. "Unless there's no one left to tell a different story." "There's always one witness left," Thorne Ridley said quietly from the darkness. Keir Dunn spun, revolver coming up, but far too late. Thorne's knife left his hand in a hard, clean blur, sinking to the hilt in the tracker's chest. Dunn staggered, disbelief stretching his scarred features into something almost absurd before he collapsed onto the mine floor. Eli Rowan rushed forward. "Mr. Ridley, you came back." "I said I would," Thorne replied, already retrieving his blade. He knelt, checked the boy's arm with a practiced eye. "Just a graze. You'll heal." "They're coming," May Rowan warned, pulling Clara Rowan close. "We heard shouting." Thorne nodded once. "There's another way out, old ventilation shaft. Comes out on the ridge above town. Can you reach it alone?" Grant Rowan, bracing Harlan Fitch, straightened despite the pain in his face. "Point the way. We'll manage." Thorne gave them quick, precise directions, then pressed his second Colt into Eli's hands. "Same rule as the Derringer, only more bite. Use it only if you must." The boy accepted the weapon with solemn resolve. "What about you, Mr. Ridley?" "I've got unfinished business with the Holts," Thorne said, steel creeping into his voice. "Eamon Rourke will be here before daylight. Head for the ridge and signal him with this." He handed Eli a small mirror. 3 flashes, pause, then 2. He'll know. As the Rowans vanished deeper into the mine, Thorne returned to the entrance. Every sense stretched thin. The chaos from the fallen stamp mill had faded, replaced by disciplined movement. Men searching, calling, closing. Garrick Holt's voice cut through the night. Closer now. "Dunn, where the hell are you?" Thorne melted into shadow, drawing his remaining Colt. Footsteps approached. 3 men. A match flared, revealing the broad frame of Orvin Holt, shotgun cradled, flanked by 2 uneasy gunmen. "Check inside," Orvin ordered, angling the barrel toward the mine. Dunn might have cornered him. One man hesitated. "Maybe we wait for Garrick." "Questioning me?" Orvin snarled, hauling the man forward by his collar. "Get in there, now." Thorne didn't move as the reluctant outlaw edged past and into the mine. 3 steps later, the man stumbled. "Jesus," he yelped, scrambling back. "Dunn's dead, knife in his chest." Orvin surged forward, filling the entrance. The matchlight caught Dunn's body and the blood trail leading deeper inside. "The hostages," Orvin muttered. "They're getting away. Let them go," Thorne said softly, stepping out behind them. All 3 spun, weapons rising. But Thorne had chosen the angle well. Orvin's shotgun couldn't swing without hitting his own men. The other two found themselves crossing lines of fire. "Ridley," Orvin said, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "Figured you'd know better than this. 3-on-1 ain't good odds." "Depends on the 3, Thorne replied evenly, Colt steady on Orvin's chest. "And on the 1. A shot cracked from up the street. One outlaw jerked, confusion flashing before he pitched forward. More shots followed, measured, precise. "Marshals," Thorne said as Orvin stiffened. "Early." The last outlaw panicked, firing wild. The round skipped off stone. Thorne's reply was devastating. One clean shot that took the man in the shoulder and spun him down. Only Orvin remained, shotgun leveled straight at Thorne's heart. At this range, it would end him. Gunfire thundered in the distance as territorial riders engaged the rest of the gang. "You've lost," Thorne said quietly. "Your brother's finished. Your outfit's done." "Maybe," Orvin growled, finger tightening. "But I can still take you with me." "You could try," Thorne said, unblinking. "You won't get the chance." Confusion crossed Orvin's face, then understanding, as cold steel touched the back of his skull. "Drop it, Holt," Eamon Rourke said behind him, voice flat as a gravestone, "or I redecorate this mind with what passes for your brains." Slowly, Orvin lowered the shotgun. 2 deputies moved in, disarming him and securing the wounded man. Rourke nodded to Thorne. "Ridley, glad you're still breathing." "You're early," Thorne said, holstering his Colt. Rourke shrugged. "I said dawn, never said which one." A grim smile tugged his mouth. "Good thing. You stirred a hornet's nest." "Vire's dead," Thorne said. "Bodies in the root cellar. The Rowans and Harlan Fitch are heading for the ridge. Signal mirror." Rourke barked orders, men fanning out to secure the town and find the hostages. Then he turned back, face hard. "Found something at Vire's camp you should see." He produced a small leather-bound journal. "Makes for ugly reading." Thorne Ridley accepted the journal, thumbing through pages packed with precise, almost scholarly handwriting. Malach Vire had recorded every hunt in obsessive detail. His victims, his methods, his fixation on the ghost hunter. But woven between the fevered entries were names, dates, and places that made Thorne's blood chill. "He wasn't acting alone," Thorne said, lifting his eyes from the page. "Someone fed him information, my movements, the people who helped me." Eamon Rourke nodded, grim in the gray light seeping into the mine mouth. "Someone with reach, money, the kind of pull needed to follow a man who doesn't want to be found." "Who?" Thorne demanded, an edge cutting into his voice that hadn't been there even when facing the Holt Cutthroats. Rourke's face hardened. "According to this, whoever they are calls themselves the benefactor. No real name. But they've got influence. And a deep grievance with you." Dawn broke over Blackwater, washing the ruined town in gold and blood-red light. Garrick Holt's outfit was finished. 6 dead, 8 captured. Garrick and Orvin Holt among them. 2 territorial riders lay wounded, none killed, a testament to discipline and Rourke's command. The Rowan family and Harlan Fitch were found and treated. Eli Rowan, arm bandaged, couldn't stop talking about how the ghost hunter saved them. The tale was already growing. Thorne stood apart, the journal heavy in his hands, eyes fixed on the eastern horizon. Lorna Whitlock rode in at first light, having persuaded a deputy to escort her from Raven's Gulch once word reached town. She dismounted and approached carefully, seeing the distance in Thorne's dark eyes. "I heard what happened," she said softly. "The town's buzzing about you facing down the Holts and a madman to save a family." Thorne didn't answer at once. It isn't over, he said finally. Vire was a symptom. Lorna frowned. Of what? He handed her the journal, open to a marked page. She read, color draining from her face. The benefactor promises more subjects, more families tied to the ghost hunter. Preparation for our ultimate quarry, she read, horror threading her voice. It isn't madness, Thorne said quietly. It's design. Someone aimed Vire at people I helped, left a trail of blood meant for me to follow. Why? Lorna asked, meeting his gaze. What could justify this? Vengeance, Thorne said, or something they've mistaken for justice. Rourke approached, tipping his hat to Lorna before turning back to Thorne. Prisoners are secured. Fort Collins by nightfall. His eyes flicked to the journal. About what we discussed. I need to draw them out, Thorne said. Decision settled. If the benefactor doesn't stop with Vire, they'll find another blade, another killer. Rourke frowned. And how do you bait someone with that kind of power? A cold smile touched Thorne's mouth, never reaching his eyes. By doing what they don't expect. I stop. They stared at him. The ghost hunter disappears, Thorne continued. Settles, becomes visible, traceable. One place long enough to look like a target too tempting to ignore. Understanding dawned on Lorna's face. You'll use yourself as bait. It's the only way, Thorne said. Otherwise, more families bleed because they crossed my path. Rourke exhaled. That's damn dangerous. Whoever this benefactor is, they can send killers in waves. Good, Thorne replied evenly. Let them come. Lorna placed a hand on his arm, surprising him. Not alone, she said. Raven's Gulch has lived under fear long enough. If you're making a stand, we stand with you. Rourke sighed, then nodded. I can arrange patrols. Not a wall, but eyes. Sunrise caught the silver pendant at Thorne's throat, throwing its design into sharp relief, a falcon in flight. From a nearby ridge, Koa cried out, circling once, as if in answer. Then it's decided, Thorne said, voice steady. The ghost hunter stops running. The hunt ends where it began. Where was that? Lorna asked softly. With a family murdered, Thorne said, meeting her eyes. A promise made. A line crossed that can't be uncrossed. As the light strengthened and shadows stretched across Blackwater, Thorne made his choice. The man who hunted criminals would become the hunted, appearing to lower his guard while setting the deadliest snare of his life. His fingers brushed the pendant, a reminder of loss and resolve. The ghost hunter would be a ghost no longer. And when the benefactor finally stepped into the light, they would learn why some legends are written in blood and bone, whispered only in the darkest hours. Rourke cleared his throat. If you're serious, there's paperwork waiting back in Raven's Gulch. Towns without a deputy since Silas Brawley's failings came to light. Gives you a reason to stay. Thorne Ridley lifted a brow, the faintest trace of dry humor crossing his face. A manhunter turning lawman, he said. There's a kind of irony in that. There's purpose, Lorna Whitlock replied gently. And maybe something else, too. As they prepared to leave the dead ruins of Blackwater behind, Eli Rowan approached, holding Thorne's Colt with both hands, careful as if it were something sacred. He offered it back with quiet pride. Didn't have to use it, Mr. Ridley, just like you said, only when it's necessary. Thorne accepted the weapon, studying the boy's face. In Eli's steady gaze, he saw a reflection of another child, from a lifetime ago. One who had watched his family die and sworn a vow that shaped everything that followed. You did well, Thorne said softly. Your family's alive because you were brave. The boy straightened at the words. Will you teach me more about tracking, about hunting? Before Thorne could answer, May Rowan hurried over, hands settling protectively on her son's shoulders. But instead of pulling him away, she gave Thorne a grateful nod. Our home is yours whenever you wish, Mr. Ridley. We owe you our lives. The weight of that gratitude sat uneasily on Thorne's shoulders. He was a man forged for solitude, not thanks. Yet as he looked around at the survivors of the night's violence, the Rowan family, Lorna, even Eamon Rourke, watching with guarded respect, he recognized something he hadn't allowed himself to name in years. There was a reason to fight beyond vengeance. Maybe peace didn't come from endless pursuit, but from standing ground, from protecting something real, from becoming a man instead of a legend. As they rode away from Blackwater, leaving its ghosts behind, Thorne made his choice. The hunt would end here, one way or another. Either Cinderlock would fall, or the ghost hunter would make his final stand. The legend born in blood would find its ending in Raven's Gulch. Raven's Gulch changed in the weeks after the Holt Cutthroats were broken. Fear loosened its grip. Shops reopened without paying tribute. Families walked the streets freely. Children played in the dust, and laughter returned to the square. At the center of it all stood the newly appointed deputy, Thorne Ridley, a title that still felt like an ill-fitted coat. The silver badge pinned to his buckskin caught the light at inconvenient moments, drawing attention to a man who had survived by going unseen. You're scowling again, Lorna said, setting a steaming cup of coffee on his desk. The sheriff's office, once Silas Brawley's before his collusion with the Holts came to light, had become Thorne's reluctant headquarters. Not scowling, Thorne replied, eyes on the papers before him. Thinking. The documents were everything Rourke had assembled about the killings tied to Malach Vire and his unseen patron. 23 families across 4 territories. All of them shared one thing. At some point, they had helped the ghost hunter. Any pattern? Lorna asked, leaning over his shoulder, studying the map marked with red X's. Nothing obvious, Thorne said, tracing the scattered points. Vire doubled back, crossed hundreds of miles between kills. What troubled him most wasn't just the scale. It was the precision. Vire had known exactly who to target, details only someone deeply familiar with Thorne's past movements could possess. Someone's been watching me for years, Thorne murmured, tracking every kindness, every place I rested. Lorna's hand rested briefly on his shoulder. We'll find them. The door swung open, and Eli Rowan burst in, having appointed himself Thorne's unofficial assistant. His arm had healed, leaving a thin scar he wore proudly. Telegram for you, Deputy Ridley, he announced. Just came in at Mercer Pike's store. Thorne took the paper. His expression hardened into the calm, predatory stillness Lorna now recognized as his hunting face. What is it? She asked. Judge Harrison Boone arrives tomorrow for the Holt trial, Thorne said. He wants extra security. Eli's eyes widened. You think someone will try to break them out? No, Thorne replied, standing and checking his Colts with practiced ease. I think someone may try to silence them. Lorna frowned. You think the benefactor would go after the Holts? They're liabilities, Thorne said, buckling his gun belt. Vire named them in his journal. If they know anything about who hired him, they're dangerous to keep alive. The trial would draw attention. Reporters, onlookers, strangers. The perfect cover for an assassin. Thorne recognized it instantly. A weakness in his trap. And an opportunity. I need the approaches secured, he said, lifting his rifle. Eli, Find Mr. Hargrove. I need 6 steady men for checkpoints." "Yes, sir," the boy said, already running. Lorna watched Thorne prepare, worry darkening her eyes. "You're expecting trouble." "I'm inviting it," he replied quietly. "This may be our best chance." As Thorne stepped onto the porch, Koa appeared as if summoned, circling once before settling on the railing. The townsfolk had grown used to the falcon, some calling it a guardian over Raven's Gulch. From the shadows across the street, another set of eyes watched the deputy and his unusual companion. A slender man in a dark eastern suit, his gaze sharp, calculating, and very patient. The man made a brief notation in a leather-bound notebook, then slipped into the bustle of Mercer Pike's general store. By nightfall, Thorne Ridley had completed the net he'd been weaving around Raven's Gulch. 6 checkpoints sealed every road into town, manned by locals armed with borrowed shotguns and hard resolve. Elias Thorne had converted his stone church into a temporary courthouse, its thick walls offering more protection than the old town hall ever had. At the Crossroads saloon, now firmly under Lorna Whitlock's hand after her father's quiet retirement, the air vibrated with tension. Travelers drawn by the Holt trial crowded the tables, voices low and speculative, trading rumors about the infamous gang and the silent deputy who had broken them. Among those patrons sat the businessman, sipping whiskey at a measured pace, eyes sharp and unblinking. When Thorne entered on his evening circuit, the man's attention sharpened, though his smile stayed pleasant. "Quite the security, deputy," he remarked as Thorne passed. "One would think you're bracing for an army, not a judge." Thorne stopped and studied him the way he'd read sign in fresh snow. "Care keeps people breathing." "Edgar Clayton," the man said smoothly. "Clayton Mercantile." He offered a card with manicured fingers. "I handle supply contracts for several territorial governments. Thought the Holt trial might present opportunities." Thorne accepted the card, but didn't pocket it. "Long way from St. Louis, Mr. Clayton." A flicker crossed the man's eyes. "I don't recall mentioning St. Louis." "You didn't," Thorne replied evenly. "Your boots did. That leather treatment's unique to Westfall Tannery on the Mississippi." Clayton recovered fast, chuckling softly. "Impressive. I see your reputation's earned, Deputy Ridley." "My reputation?" Thorne echoed, his voice dropping just enough to still nearby conversations. "As a man who notices details," Clayton clarified. "Essential in law enforcement." Before Thorne could respond, a ripple moved through the saloon. Judge Harrison Boone had arrived, a barrel-chested man with white hair and eyes that had condemned more men than most hangmen. He crossed straight to Thorne, extending a weathered hand. "Deputy Ridley, Eamon Rourke speaks highly of you, says Raven's Gulch owes you for the Holt arrests." "The territorial riders did the heavy lifting," Thorne said, keeping Clayton in the corner of his vision. "I just happened to be standing in the way." Boone laughed, low and thunderous. Modest, rare. He leaned closer. "I'd like to review tomorrow's security." As Thorne guided the judge aside, he felt Clayton's gaze linger. The man was sharper than most. He hadn't just noticed the probing, he'd parried it. Later that night, as Thorne finished his rounds and climbed the steps to the office above the jail, a familiar silhouette waited on the porch. "Thought you'd be resting," Thorne said. "Couldn't," Lorna Whitlock admitted, stepping into the lamplight. "Tomorrow feels wrong. Like we're all actors who don't know the last act." Her unease mirrored his own. "Keep your father's shotgun loaded tonight," he said quietly. "Stay clear of windows." She studied his face. "You've identified a threat." "Possibly. Edgar Clayton. Too interested in our defenses." The gentleman from St. Louis? Lorna frowned. He dined at the saloon, asked many questions about you. Thorne's jaw tightened. What kind of questions? She hesitated. Your past, where you came from, whether you had family. A pause. Whether you and I were close. That troubled him more than any rifle sight. The benefactor wasn't just tracing old connections. They were testing present ones. Lorna, Thorne began, softer than usual. Don't, she cut in. I'm not leaving Raven's Gulch, and I'm not stepping away from you. Whatever comes, we face it together. Her resolve was as immovable as the Blackbone Mountains looming beyond town. Thorne nodded once. Then stay sharp, and remember what I taught you. She tapped the small derringer hidden in her sleeve. Always. As she walked off, Thorne lifted his eyes to the stars. Koa circled once, then settled on the roofline for the night watch. The air carried that familiar pressure, the hush before violence. The benefactor had sent a scout. Whether Edgar Clayton was merely gathering information or leading something darker remained to be seen. Either way, the trap was working. Thorne touched the silver falcon at his throat, a ritual now. Tomorrow would bring Judge Boone's court, the Holt's judgment, and perhaps the first real thread leading to the hand behind it all. The ghost hunter was no longer hunting, but his enemy was moving. Dawn broke over Raven's Gulch in a strange crimson light, painting the town as if blood itself had risen with the sun. Elias Thorne's stone church now pressed into service as a courthouse, threw a long morning shadow across Main Street, where townsfolk gathered despite the early hour. The trial of the Holt Cutthroats had drawn spectators from 3 territories, packing Raven's Gulch to the seams. Thorne Ridley watched the swelling crowd from the sheriff's rooftop, his custom rifle laid across his knees. From that perch, he could cover every approach to the church while staying largely unseen. 4 trusted men held matching rooftops, their positions overlapping in careful arcs of fire. A precaution that had lifted Judge Harrison Boone's brows but earned his curt approval. Koa settled beside Thorne without a sound, sharp eyes sweeping the street. In its talons hung a scrap of paper that hadn't been there at first light. Thorne eased the note free and unfolded it. The handwriting was precise, educated. The merchant carries a derringer in his left boot and a garrote wire in his watch pocket. 3 more arrived overnight, 1 at the livery, 2 at Widow Park's boarding house. All bear the mark of the severed arrow. The warning from Eamon Rourke confirmed what Thorne suspected. The severed arrow, an old sigil tied to war-era mercenaries known for ruthless efficiency, didn't appear by accident. Their presence in Raven's Gulch was no coincidence. The church bell rang 9. Thorne whistled a 3-note call, alerting the rooftop sentries to the new threat, then dropped to street level. The crowd parted on instinct as he moved toward the church, dark eyes cataloging unfamiliar faces. Edgar Clayton stood near the steps, speaking with a rail-thin man whose ill-cut suit failed to hide a wiry strength. Their talk died as Thorne approached. Deputy Ridley, Clayton greeted, smooth as polished brass. Allow me to introduce Mr. Harper, a business associate. He's keenly interested in frontier justice. Indeed, Harper said, a faint southern drawl coloring the words. Fascinating how justice adapts out here. Thorne noted the calluses on Harper's hands, not merchant's marks, but the wear of weapons. Justice is justice, Thorne replied. Only the scenery changes. Profound. Clayton smiled thinly. Will you be testifying today, Deputy? When called, Thorne said, his gaze dropping to Harper's left boot, an ankle bulge exactly where Rourke had warned. Inside, the church bore little resemblance to a sanctuary. Pews had been rearranged into a courtroom, the altar table raised to serve as the bench. The Holt brothers sat shackled in a crude prisoner's box, their menace dulled by weeks in irons. Garrick Holt's rust-colored beard gone feral. Orvin Holt's massive frame diminished by confinement. Lorna Whitlock took a seat near the front. Her green eyes met Thorne's for a heartbeat as he set himself against the wall with clear sight lines to both prisoners and doors. Eli Rowan sat beside her, solemn under the weight of the day. Judge Boone entered with practiced gravity, black robes whispering as he took the bench. Charges followed: 27 counts of murder, 43 of robbery, 16 of extortion, and a litany more. Garrick looked bored. Orvin's glare never left Thorne. Clayton and Harper sat midway down the nave, sightlines clean to judge and prisoners. A stocky man with a miner's build took the pew behind them. One of the night arrivals Rourke had flagged. The fourth was still missing. As the prosecutor began, Thorne caught a flicker of recognition between Clayton and Garrick. Brief, telling. The Holt ties ran deeper than rumor, perhaps not direct, but threaded through men like Clayton. Testimony opened with Mercer Pike, who spoke of years under the gang's thumb. Clayton checked his watch with feigned disinterest. Thorne saw his thumb test the case's edge, brushing the hidden wire. Eli Rowan followed, voice steady as he recounted his family's ordeal. Asked to identify accomplices, he pointed without hesitation to the Holt brothers. "And who brought you out alive?" the prosecutor asked. "Deputy Ridley," Eli said, proud, though folks called him the ghost hunter. A murmur rippled through the church, pens scratched as journalists leaned in. Rumors had teeth now. Clayton and Harper exchanged a glance as Eli returned to his seat and Lorna squeezed his shoulder. Thorne's attention snagged on movement at the back. An unfamiliar woman in a dark travel dress who'd slipped in during Eli's testimony. Her gloved hands stayed folded in her lap, hiding something beneath a neatly folded shawl. Judge Boone called a midday recess. As the crowd spilled into the pale sun, Thorne intercepted Lorna and Eli. "Stay inside," he said low, away from windows. "They're here," Lorna breathed. "The ones tied to Malach Vire." "Yes," Thorne said. "Likely more than we've counted." Eli's eyes widened. "What are they planning?" "Not sure yet," Thorne answered, tracking Clayton and his associates as they exited separately, each drifting to a different corner of the churchyard. They hadn't come for the law itself. Their movement pattern told a different story. Angles covered, sight lines claimed, positions chosen for speed and precision. It was the setup for an extraction or a clean execution, not a courtroom spectacle. Every placement pointed toward one moment: the transfer of the prisoners back to the jail. Thorne Ridley slipped outside, melting into the shifting crowd until he reached the prison wagon where Eamon Rourke waited, jaw tight beneath his hat. "Your warning landed just in time," Thorne said under his breath. Rourke gave a grim nod. Clayton showed up on a federal circular. Real name, Edmund Kane. Former Army intelligence. The woman's Vivian Mercer, poison and silent weapons. The rest are hired blades. "Their target?" Thorne asked, already knowing. "The Holts," Rourke confirmed. "They know too much about who's been paying them. Loose ends." The picture locked into place. Cinder Locke couldn't afford the Holts talking. Not now. Not with Malach Vire's journal tying threads together. Thorne's voice dropped. "Then we make them panic. Force them to act before they're ready." Rourke arched a brow. "How?" "We let the Holts believe they've been abandoned." When court resumed, Judge Boone called Thorne to the stand. As he rose, Thorne felt Kane's eyes on him. Cool, clinical, measuring risk the way a surgeon measures bone. Thorne testified with careful precision, recounting Blackwater, Vire's actions, and the financial shadow behind him. He watched Garrick Holt's posture shift, boredom bleeding into unease. Did Vire ever name this employer? The prosecutor asked. No, Thorne said. Only called them the benefactor. And what did he say about them? That they had money, influence, and that the Holts believed they'd be protected if captured. The bait was set. Garrick's head snapped up. His eyes narrowed as realization crept in. The prosecutor pressed, "Any other details?" "Only that this person hates me," Thorne continued evenly. "Something rooted in Black Ridge Pass." The reaction rippled fast. Kane's mask cracked, just a heartbeat. Vivian Mercer stiffened, her hand tightening beneath her shawl. Then Garrick barked a harsh laugh. "You don't know, do you, Ghost?" he shouted. "You don't even know who's been hunting you." Boone slammed the gavel. "Silence!" But Garrick was past restraint. "Tell him, Kane. Tell him who's pulling the strings." Kane rose smoothly, hand drifting toward his coat. The room shifted, spectators sensing the turn before understanding it. "That's enough," Kane said coolly. Everything detonated at once. Mercer snapped a compact crossbow from beneath her shawl, aimed not at Thorne, but at Garrick. Harper reached inside his jacket. The stocky man lunged toward the bench. Thorne moved. Both Colts cleared leather in a single breath. The first shot shattered Mercer's crossbow, the bolt screaming into the ceiling. The second caught Harper high in the shoulder, spinning him away from the prisoners. Screams erupted as bodies hit the floor. Lorna Whitlock yanked Eli Rowan down behind a pew. Judge Boone vaulted his bench with surprising speed. Kane used the chaos, drawing a derringer and leveling it at Garrick. "The benefactor sends regards," Kane said coldly. Thorne's third shot knocked the pistol from Kane's grip. Kane turned, composed even now, eyes locking with Thorne's. "This changes nothing. You've only delayed the inevitable. Locke's reach is longer than you know." The stocky man charged with a knife. Thorne fired once, clean, low. The man dropped, howling. Then the storm ended. Rourke and the territorial riders flooded the room, securing Kane and the survivors. Garrick slumped in his box, pale and shaking after his near death. In the aftermath, as the wounded were tended, Lorna reached Thorne's side, Eli close behind her. "You knew they'd strike," she said. "I made sure they would," Thorne replied. "Better here, on our ground." Eli stared at the captured killers. They were going to kill the Holts. "The benefactor prizes silence above loyalty," Thorne said quietly, "including the lives of servants." As Kane was led past in irons, he paused. "You've won nothing today, Ghost. Who is the benefactor?" Thorne demanded. "What happened at Black Ridge Pass?" Kane smiled thinly. "Ask yourself who else walked out of that blizzard. Besides Vire. Besides you." Then he was gone. Thorne stood in the ruined courtroom, the echo of Kane's words settling like frost. The shadow behind the killings hadn't stepped into the light. But for the first time, its shape was beginning to show. "Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you, truly. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, Human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.